Episode 3, Part 1. A New Vision.
I still can't get over all this. Why us? It's practically impossible.
Thousands of unanswered questions circulate in Vakama's mind. He has always been a particular hero, acting with fear because he didn't want to fail himself, his brothers, but above all the Great Spirit. On the other hand, even the strong self-confidence had blinded him to the point of betraying his comrades because of Rudaka. When he became Turaga instead, he promised to teach everything to the future Toa and Matoran so that none of them could make the same mistakes. His companions remembered almost anything about what happened before their awakening. They didn't know how much time had passed or how many generations of Toa there had been. There must have been a serious emergency. This was the first hypothesis that was approved by the former Turaga. They thought it was the Toa Nova that were somehow responsible. Perhaps, as it happened in the past, they would have assumed the same role of the Toa Mata after the Great Cataclysm. But aside from the constant dangers of Tuma's army, there was nothing to fear. Their only problem was that weird symbol that they had imprinted on their shoulder. None of them could understand what it was or what it symbolized. Maybe it was a map, and the 3 rays of the clover were actually some sort of ways from which to start. Only a few days after their departure, Vakama had a sign, a suggestion perhaps. In a vision, he found himself immersed in a liquid. He looked up at the sky. It was completely dark, with a giant moon and a huge constellation that somehow decorated it. He could not move, and after some seconds he found himself on a small beach. He immediately saw a tall Sylvan stone with a large staircase. A strong and cold wind made the Toa shudder. A small light, however, seemed to come from the temple. Perhaps it's a little bonfire. Finally a small source of heat, he said. He went up and reached the place of worship to refuge himself from that strong wind. Once at the top, however, he saw the horror. The mask of his companions was laying on each pillar of the temple, with a sword or red cross marked on the wall. Suddenly darkness fell, and Vakama glimpsed a small light, trying to hurl himself at it. In vain, he could not reach it, as if something was holding him back. A sweet and reassuring voice spoke very close to him and said,
Move in the darkness.
Part 2. Poison. Disappeared. She was nowhere. Mata was afflicted. His sister was no longer with him. 2 distant blue lights flashing in the cold ice desert seemed to attract his attention. "I'm going to look there," he said, desperate. It was from there that the adventure of the 2 Toa began. They were following the direction indicated by the symbol, and after a few hours, they ran into a wasteland completely covered by snow. "This would have been the ideal environment for Nuju," Metal supposed jokingly. From distance, they saw a few mountains from which they would have had a useful vantage point to understand in which direction to continue. They managed to climb hardly the first relief in front of them and decided to rest in a cave. Unfortunately, they were attacked by an ash bear, and Okama was wounded before she could use the power of her Kanohi mask. Once the danger was overcome, Metal came out of the cave, using his wings to speed up. He had to look for a healing herb as soon as possible, but on the other hand, finding a single blade of grass in that desert was almost impossible. Fortunately, after an hour of travel, he found a small forest over 2 snowy hills. With great speed, he went to the site in search of some tiaki plant, with healing effects similar to the waters of New Mari Nui. In the past, in fact, Turaga no Kama taught with Toagali the healing arts that the element could offer. She was also the one who, during a visit to Tizara, discovered the leaves of the tiaki plant. After studying them, she discovered that they also had healing powers and had them stored with the consent of Turaga Matau throughout War Nui. Matau was moved to the mere memory. But he shouldn't think about it. Nokama had to be cured. So he took a few handfuls of tiaki leaves, but in the meantime, a strong heat invaded his whole body. Fire, fire everywhere. The forest, his environment, suddenly caught fire. His eyes filled with horror. He couldn't give a logical explanation of how everything could have happened so suddenly. Was it some particular sign? He managed to escape, but when he returned to the cave, Nokama was no longer there. He absolutely needed to tell her what happened, but at the moment it was not possible. Then he saw the two blue lights flashing in the fog and immediately reached the place. He noticed a patrol of soldiers loading the toa water on a transport ship, similar to those of Lee Metru. On the left side, there was a very strange symbol, which Mattel could not distinguish well because of the thick fog. Who were those soldiers and who sent them? Only Wenua and Donewa discovered it, but in a very tragic way. The two toa were on their way to the Creek Canyon. They wanted and had to make sure that their people were safe. Now their home no longer symbolized security and protection. They could expect anything. They suddenly saw a hill in the distance. It had to be the Hill of Jovan, from which it was possible to see the gates of Toka and Wenui with a telescope. It was not so. On top of it, they saw a large city destroyed and steaming in some parts. There was no doubt that the great clash had just taken place. Once they arrived, they immediately looked for some survivors, but they found nothing less than corpses of Matoran coming from any village. Entire building collapsed, small dwellings were burning on the main streets, and a huge dark smoke spread everywhere. In the distance, they saw some red splashes randomly scattered over buildings. Wenua, with intuition, decided to move.
Perhaps if I change my point of view, aligning those throw-ins,
He assumed, and so it was, but the view shocked the tall earth, which remained motionless. Onua approached and asked him what he had seen, but received no answer. Only by looking into the distance, he realized it too. A huge H, enclosed by a red circle, was imprinted on the buildings in the distance, forming a sort of puzzle. Now everything was clearer. Everything was ready. The departure was scheduled in 14 hours. Stormer, Stringer, and Nax were equipped for their mission. The mood in the three heroes was completely different. Stringer thought that it was the usual mission assigned by Alpha Leader. Nax, instead, was very agitated. It was an opportunity to prove his worth. He also could have discovered the truth behind Eva's case. For Stormer, instead, everything was different. It was a real risk. His next trip would have been perhaps the most dangerous of all. Only Makuro and he were aware of the true purpose of this mission, namely to find the members who became spokesmen and protectors of the Ignaika. More than that, he did not know. The reason why Makuro wanted to have a dialogue with these agents was completely unknown. The next day, Stormer had a meeting with him before leaving. Everything, as he said, was for a greater good. Makuro had clear ideas. But while Stormer was leaving with the two heroes, he saw Makuro watching them at the entrance of the hero factory and noticed a small grin on his face. It is also important to note that time was running differently between the planet where Makihiro City was located and the Solis Magna system. So even the concept of hours, days, months, and years was different for the heroes. But what was certain, according to Makuro's studies, was that the time of Solis Magna passed more slowly. To avoid interference or delay in communication, in the past, Makuro ordered to post a series of specific single repeaters at various points in the galaxy before reaching that part of space where Solis Magna was embedded. In 18 hours, they landed on a checkpoint located near Tezara inside the jungle. A soldier was waiting them 500 bios from the base. When they arrived in the shelter, they were entrusted with a group of 5 well-equipped guards. Many of the checkpoint soldiers were honored to meet high-ranking members like them. Stormer, unlike the other two, was focused on the mission. He was only thinking about that strange grain. He didn't dare imagine what Makura's true intentions were. He was only concerned about his men and Makura too. Any false move could have sparked an unparalleled conflict. In the forest, they started the user researches for the protodermis as in the last years. The studies had only focused on the composition of this material. It was able to adapt incredibly to any environment and any climate. Even its malleability deserved the special attention. Strong similarities to the quasar led experts to claim that their protodermis was probably connected to it. The different psychochemical properties coincided almost perfectly. The radar marked a strong amount of protodermis in front of them, until at some point a huge explosion shook all members of the expedition. It was coming from the checkpoint. So the group split in two. Stringer would have returned along with 3 units to the base, and Stormer continued alongside Nax and the remaining soldiers. Once the correct amount of protodermis had been recovered, Alpha Leader called Stringer. The two groups could not be encountered during the collection of protodermis because of the interferences, probably caused by the material. Once removed it from the collection area, they tracked down Stringer and headed towards his location. Unfortunately, they only found the corpses of soldiers and scientists scattered everywhere. Their base shattered. The cause seemed to be something far more powerful than their equipment. At some point, a voice behind some bushes invited them to hide. Stormer recognized that voice. It was Stringer. Without thinking twice, he had his men hidden by an axe and in the meantime reached Stringer. Soon after, a huge creature appeared on the spot. In silence, the heroes observed the behavior of that being. It seemed it was looking for something or someone. It had a long spear that emitted toxic gas, and the green color of its armor sparkled in the sunlight. Its red eyes terrified the hidden soldiers and Stormer too. On his command, the soldiers fired on the creature, which was partially wounded but still managed to run away. Under Alpha Leader's order, they decided to split into 3 groups, each led by the 3 heroes. After a few minutes of searching, one of the 3 groups was attacked. During the battle, Nax was badly wounded. At that point, Stormer decided to request help from the nearest checkpoint. Meanwhile, the creature managed to flee away, disappearing in the forest. The medics brought Nax to the Squaw River headquarters, where he was sent to intensive care. Stormer felt somehow responsible for what happened. That research blinded him, and now his mistake was costing the life of a young hero.